Hi.
Hello.
Okay, good morning. Yeah, so you sent me that list of questions. I did have some things I wanted to go over, but I think it's good if I first just go through what you've asked me, so to get that all cleared up. So I'm going to share my screen. Close my Share screen. Okay. That's my Sublime windows up in here too. Okay. So you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yes.
Let me go through the questions. So question one. You changed company.getName. Okay, so company.getName is empty. Oh, I remember this, yeah. To company get name. No. So these conditions I was using in an example of what to return. That should be lowercase. But the thing is when I was using this condition,
Mm-hmm.
it was returning a null pointer exception because when I was doing company.getName, that was returning null, right? And then, so then I was doing null.isEmpty. Now obviously null doesn't have any functions. So when we do null.isEmpty, that's what causes the null pointer exception. So instead I was just, because this was just an example, I was checking if the company name was empty. Because
Mm-hmm.
then that returns,
And how do you know when you can use is empty and why when you can't use
Okay,
it?
so is empty, I mean there's different, so on a string, this is empty, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what is empty means, is it's a string but there's nothing in it, right? So it's a valid string object because I can do, right? And that equals true because it's a string. Whereas if I do null is instance of string, that's going to be false,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's the same with lists. So I can have like new array list dot is empty, and that's fine because and that will return true. But I can't do if I try and get an array list from get array list, and that method returns null. Like anytime you do null dot anything, any
Mm-hmm.
method call, it will always return null pointer exception.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the whole reason optionals are introduced. And we can go over sort of explaining the whole purpose of that, or whatever. Okay, so that's question one. I hope that's. Are you satisfied with that, or do you want some more explanation?
Yes, I think that quite satisfied.
Okay, cool. Um,
Enough for my level of knowledge.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Question two. I'll just copy this straight into it. So I can't copy, whatever. So I changed dot response entity dot accepted
Mm-hmm. To okay.
to okay. Yeah. So I believe so. There are all of these HTTP status codes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we go to 200, typically, like we should be using 200 for most things. Most people do. Maybe in some cases you want to use these, but typically that's why I was using OK because as you see, 200 is OK, so that's what we usually see, and that's what it sends by default if it's successful, and 202 is successed. So, for example, in this 202, you should only, when you're using these things, because they're used everywhere, they're like a standard, you should make sure it meets this description, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the description here is the request has been accepted for processing, but the process has not been completed, which is not the case in our scenario, right? So 200 and FH, so that's 200 and that is 202.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So moving on from that.
Yes.
Um, Why do you use response entity in post? Response entity string in delete? Because, okay, so when we do this, response entity, the reason I was doing this was just as an example. as basically in a response entity, we can say that we want the response entity to specifically return a string, or when we do this, it's called a wildcard, and it means we want it to return anything, or alternatively, you could do object. But why I had a string here was so in my response entity, I could actually say, could not find X, because then we can give a specific message, because maybe these status codes here, maybe there's one that's not specific enough, so for example, let me just, so for example, maybe you want to say company does not have country, or company does not have company name, something like that. This is obviously too specific to be found in this list. And we might want to pass that feedback to the user. So that's when we would return a string, because if they keep seeing, not acceptable, they're like, okay, why is it not acceptable? What am I doing wrong?
Do you think that I would add response entities for successful cases?
It depends, because it seems like your server, like by default, it already returns 200, right? Because that's if you look through the video, that's what's happening for me. So in successful cases, maybe there is additional information that you want to give to them. So you could say, company added at X time, or maybe if that's important to the application. But in most circumstances, if people receive a 200, okay, as long as things are actually okay and everything's working as expected, I think they'll generally, sort of understand that's...
Okay.
Okay, why do I make company list final? Yes, okay, so there's a different... So this is just my sort of code style. So when I'm making something final, what I'm saying is we can still edit this company list, right? We can still do company list dot add, company list dot remove. Okay, we can do these operations, but what we can't do is we can't say company list equals null, or company list equals new array list. So we're allowing these because these are methods inside the allowed in final, and these are, reassignments. This is not very important. This is just kind of, your brain develops these natural patterns about how to change your code, and so that's just kind of how I was going through it. That's not the most important thing there.
Okay.
Why do we make company list private? Okay, why do we make company list private? I thought the CSV controller task 3 will modify it. This is a good question. So, why is company list private? I thought the controller modify it. So why do we do this? Now the reason we do this is because of something called encapsulation. So, are you familiar with encapsulation?
A little bit.
Okay, so basically, we don't want controller to have complete autonomy over company lists. So inside controller, we don't want to be able to do company list dot add dot remove dot whatever, because what we want to do is we want to provide an interface in the company service. So in company service, we make the methods public that can access this. So we can choose exactly what happens. So for example, let's say we have an audit trail in company service, and we want like a little item of description every time something's edited on this company list, so we can keep track of the state of the list. If we let controller do whatever it wants to the company list, then this audit trail won't be enforced. But if we provide methods in here, like company.add, or company list.add, company list remove, or whatever, inside of the service itself, then every time we add something, we can make sure it's added to the audit trail, or we can make sure that any action before it happens is necessary. Just like maybe we want some specific logic about we can only remove an item in the company list. So remove if acceptable. Maybe for instance, we only want to remove items if they're recent enough. So let's say company has a added date. Added date. And then if the added dot whatever, then the time is within a certain range, then we allow it to. Then we can remove the item. So this should take a string. Company name. Oh, I'll just write this in pseudocode. Company name. Right. So then we can enforce this sort of our logic here to make sure that you can't change this willy-nilly. Whereas if we allow this in controller, anything can happen. And for example, when you're working on a project on your own, it's not so much of a big deal because it gives you more flexibility. But as you sort of expand out, not everyone will know exactly how everything should work. And so if you provide these proper interfaces, these proper means of accessing the list, it kind of restricts their access and makes things exactly how you want them to be.
Okay.
Okay, cool. When I change private final list company to new array list, yes, I get an error. Okay, so you say you get an error when you change a list. That's company, I think. Oh no, should be array list. Raised as list. Company. Okay. So you say you get an error when you change this to list? Did you say? What's the error you receive? Is that a syntax error? Because this is valid as far as I'm concerned.
I think that another change was made.
Yeah. So do you understand the reasoning why we use list rather than array list?
Yes, this was changed successfully.
Okay.
I got an error in another place where I delete array list of. There were a lot of words. I will find just a minute. Company list, new array. This is not the list. When I change array list of arrays as a list, new company.
Oh.
Just to arrays as a list. When I delete array list before arrays. Yeah. And then only arrays is left, and it can't be modified, and then I can't post companies to this array. Oh. As far as I understand.
Okay, has this been pushed?
Yes. No.
I'll make the change quickly.
My code has been pushed, but your suggestion was second. It is not pushed.
Okay. I'm just putting more IntelliJ. It's taking a while for some reason.
not. I think that I specified the exception. Not allowed action, something like this.
Not allowed action. Okay, 1 second. Is this a syntax exception or a runtime exception?
I don't know.
Oh, you put a stack trace, so it must be a runtime.
Okay, when you do arrays as a list. And here you can try to make post.
Sure. So post is add company. Right?
Mm-hmm. Add company. Okay.
Wait, does this return a... fixed sized. Oh, no, it's fine. Changes made to this verb be visible in the return list. Yeah, so this is returning an array list, so I don't understand what the problem is. Oh, wait, but that's the... Yeah, it just passes in this as the... Oh, that should be fine. I can't... Okay, hold up. Add company. Oh, the server's not running. That's a good reason for it not to work. $500 internal server error. Unsupported operation exception. Okay, I guess it doesn't like I guess array list as list. Doesn't like if I do new array list. Sorry, let me just quickly. Okay, let's try this. It might just be that this array list returns an unmodifiable list. Because list.add, if you look at list itself, there should be an add method in here. You see, so but it is supported. I don't know why I'm having this issue. But I can understand the frustration of these Java best practice changes causing problems, because it's already working, so why would we change it? But it's just a case of this is kind of what's done in industry. Everyone I've never seen in our code base either of my jobs something declared as array list. Maybe there's an argument to be made, but usually it's just kind of there's no discussion over the issue. Everyone does it this way, and so it looks more sort of professional if you're in an interview and then your code is using the Yeah.
But everything is okay with the list you are selecting.
Yes.
The second part is not working. When I put only list, okay, I'll show you.
Yeah,
Like
so that issue is fixed now. So basically, this was just because arrays as list that returns a fixed size array, and so it's like an immutable array. So when we try and edit it, it doesn't like it.
So this approach works.
Yes, it works. It works just if you don't use instead of initializing it with arrays.asList, we initialize it with an array list.
Okay. And do you think that it is better?
Yes. Well, I think it's better for sure, yeah. Because, I mean, list is less of a concern. I mean, but if we're using something like a set and we want to change it from a hash set to a tree set, like this is something we should definitely support. Same with maps. And yeah. And it's just a good thing to get in the habit of doing in case, because realistically in this example, I don't think we're going to use a linked list. It doesn't make sense to use a linked list. But in future, if we were to use, in another few, if you get into the habit of doing this, when you do need to swap a collection out, then you've already got it ready to do that. And it happens fairly frequently, honestly, so.
Okay.
Okay, are we happy?
But yes, not to the end. When I use this code in CSV writing controller,
Yep.
Everything will be okay.
CSV.
Because this code that I posted to you, it also uses list.
Oh, CSV writing. Well, that's good then. CSV write controller. CSV. I didn't see that.
Okay. It is still not working, but I hope it will work. So then, how will I get this list? Will everything be okay to have this list in the constructor?
Will everything be? So if it's declared as list, yes. If it's a list of company, then it will be perfectly fine.
Okay. So
So what we for task 3, what we kind of expect is the way we kind of want to do most of our processing is we want to have it in services. So we would create new services for we would get rid of the main in here, obviously. And then we would create this as kind of a service to handle the main flow of things. And then maybe you could keep these as they are.
Okay.
Okay.
I am happy.
Okay, cool. Right, so let me quickly, we've stumbled into optional, and I think optional is usually kind of a later topic, but I think if you get a good understanding of it early, then it might be better because you can kind of grow with it rather than having to swap to it later on, because optional is the better way to sort of do things in terms of, because in Java, we have to deal with nulls a lot, right? This is kind of the whole reason we have optional, is I get a method, so let's say I have public company, get company. Now, the issue is, what do I return if the company is not there? Right? So typically, in this example, if the company is not there, you don't return like a new company with nothing inside of it, right? Because that doesn't really make sense because there's no company. So we return null to represent that. But then the issue is, in another method, if I have, if I end up using that, if I use get company, and then I have this as a company object. Now, if I want to return, I want to save company name, right? I can't just do company.get company name, not get name, because this search could return null, right? So if I do the result of this dot get company name, it would be potentially null dot get name. which will then cause a null pointer exception, which is really annoying. So what we have to do is in Java, every time an object could be null, we have to do if company dot not equal to null, then do this. And we have to do this so much. And so this is kind of the problem, is we have to constantly deal with these nulls, and it's not a very nice way of working, basically. But whereas if we use an optional, actually, I'll start a new project quickly. So I'll give it some files. Okay, I have to keep doing this. It's very annoying. Should change the default. Okay. So I'm just going to create a contrived example here. So private string get company name, and it's going to use a random. It's going to generate a random number and random. Well, it's actually just going to generate a random boolean. New random. Okay, so here's our example. I'm just going to quickly get this padded out. So, okay. Needs to be static. Right, so now our problem here is sometimes this will run successfully, sometimes it will fail. Again, because this is just trying to emulate different circumstances, so sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. Oh. Right, so in this instance, there was a null pointer exception, but if I run it again, it might be perfectly fine. Okay. There we go, this one was perfectly fine. So, what do we do here? So let's try changing this to optional and see how this helps. So when we use optional, first of all, we know if something returns an optional that it could return null. So there's never this issue of, because we don't even get a string object, so we can't try and just perform the operation on the string. We're actively aware that yeah, okay. We're actively aware that we've got an optional here. So now what we can do is there's multiple different ways of doing it. If company name one.get is present, so now you've got is present and is empty on these again, right? So which is great because you can't do null.isEmpty, right? Because again that gives us an error. But you can do company name one.isEmpty. So now if is empty, I can have not found. So it's explicitly making us handle it. Else I can have company.get.toUppercase. Okay, does this make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Oh wait, one second, I need to put an else there. Just trying to get it to display not found. There we go. So there's actually an easier way we can do this. So if we just want to display this, so this makes sense as a reasonable use case for optional, right? Is we're explicitly saying that something can return is optional. We're saying that it's not necessarily going to be there. So when we get it, we don't know if it's going to be there, and you're going to have to handle that yourself. But we can also use these various methods in the optional to help us. So we can use the isEmpty, or if we want to do something where it's present, we can use the company name.isPresent. Now I understand this is basically the same as doing company name1 not equals null, but at least this time we explicitly know it's an optional. Now there is another benefit of optional, because optional has more than one method. So if we look at this, then we can do we can already get into sort of lambda stuff. So you've seen this, you know? So we could have system.out. What else? I think this will take a string. Yes. Not found. So this one's more simple. This isn't really too lambda-y, you know? So but right now this is like much simpler because we've got this all in one, and we can also get into sort of other interesting things. So like if present, then you can do company name. This is declaring the company is the, again, this is a lambda. I'll set this up for, in task 4, I'll make sure we use lambdas, because I think they're a good paradigm to start off Java with as well, or like get further into Java, because people, they're used widely nowadays. So I can just change this to that, and then if it's present, it'll print that, otherwise it won't print anything. There's no worry of there being a null pointer exception, everything's handled neatly, and anyone new working to the code base. Now I know this is a bit awkward, but when you're kind of, it's very important to companies that the code you write is very readable, because code is read 10 times more. Well, I'm giving a random number, but it's read so much more than it's actually written. So we need to make sure the code we write is very readable, and optionals are very, very readable and very sort of popular, and they're new. They came in Java 8, I believe. So yeah, 1.8. Okay, cool. So once you get the hang of optionals as well, you can do all sorts of fancy things with these by streaming them and mapping them, and then you don't have to write. You can have about 5 or 4 lines of code and 1 neat line of code in like a sort of a functional programming style. Okay, any questions about optionals?
Why did they appear in my project? Because I used lambdas?
Yes. So I'll show you why they appeared in your project. I think I explained this, but maybe it's better to give an example.
When I used filter.
Yes.
Or just because I used lambdas, because I used filters.
Yeah, so it's an optional isn't necessarily, 1 second. So an optional is not necessarily involved with lambdas. So list. So
okay.
I do list. So this is an empty list. So when I do list.stream.filter, So why do these both return optional? Okay, because they're using the pattern, right? So these are both returning optional because when we do find first or find any, we don't know if it's going to be there, right? So first, hello. Okay, I shouldn't do that. I'll keep it. This makes it clearer, but even though it's so find any, introduce item, matching item. Now it's an optional because this find any method, this method can't return a string. Do we understand why it can't return a string? If it returned a string, it would have to return, if it doesn't find, so if it finds, it returns the string, otherwise, returns null. Because if it doesn't find it, it can't return a string, right? It can't it can't return an empty string because that doesn't make sense. So it would have to return null, and then we have to deal with the issue of handling null, which we have to do all the time, and it's an absolute nightmare. So when it returns an optional, not only do we know explicitly what's going to happen if it doesn't find it, we can then choose how we handle it. So instead of just, because let's say for instance you have a program that's been running for a few months on the live system, and you're expecting it always to find a result in the filter when you do find first, because there's millions of records, and it's a simple filter that should always get at least, you'd expect it at least to get 50 results. But in one time, no results. Now this is where it calls a null pointer exception, because you'd just be expecting the string you got back, to be there, but it's not there. And so in that case, with an optional, you can't just do, I can't just do matching item to uppercase, right? Because it's not a string, it's an optional, and so it's forcing me to handle it. So this is how they got introduced. So when you do find any, or find basically any of the find methods, because find is not a sure thing, then you'll run into this issue. Well, I don't think it's an issue, but that's why it was introduced.
Okay. So sometimes, for example, the second your suggestion was without optional to handle these exceptions.
Yes.
So sometimes we can use this optional and even don't know that we are using them. They are somewhere in the code and we are not not aware of.
Well, yes. So they might be being used under the hood. I see what you mean, but like but when you're doing the or else, right? So here, you might not understand that you're actually using an optional, right? You think you're just you're just using a string, but yeah, they're actually being used behind the scenes. So it's a good thing to have an understanding of it, because this method can only be called on an optional. Right? That's why you can call it here, because the find any returns an optional. So if we lay this out, basically, this will be useful when we go into lambdas later as well. So at each stage of the call, we're actually dealing with different data types. Right? So here we have a list of string, and then when we do stream, we have a stream. We have a stream of string, and then here we have another stream of string, because
filtered.
Yeah, but we'll have fewer items. And then here we have an optional of string, and then here we have a string. So that's why it gets back to string, because we're going list, okay, and then from the list we get a stream. Okay, that's good. You can see if I mouse over that, it will say stream. Then this will also return a stream. Right, and then this will return an optional, and then that will get it back to a string. And so this is affecting the contract we can do on each of these things. And so yes, we could. So when you're using the or else, you might have seen this and saying, oh, okay, this method is vaguely involved with lambdas or streams, so I'll use this. It seems to make sense. I found it online. But actually, we're using that from an optional. So you could split this up at every level. So that's the last thing I'll do today, I think. So list is a list, and then we have list.stream. Streamed list. Then we have .filter. Filter streamed list. Then we have if exists, first matching string if exists. Find first. And then from this, so this should make it a lot clearer exactly what's happening. String found string. So when I say found string, it could obviously be empty. So this is the reason why lambdas are kind of good. It's because, this whole streaming architecture, I should say, rather than lambdas, is because we're making these 4 lines into sort of one line, and we're just processing on the data type that's returned over and over again.
Okay.
Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess sort of get cracking with task 3. If that's all well and good, I think we should try and split that out into services, and maybe I'll, if you're done with that too quickly, maybe I'll add something additional, because it seems like task 2 to task 3 shouldn't be that much work, because you've already done task 3 and task 1.
Hope.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, okay. So if you want me to add more work, I can add that. Otherwise, it's just a case of now it's just a case, I suppose, of how well you understand what things should look like in Spring Boot and how things sort of, the flow should work. And if you want more work to do on task 3, I can make you, extend that out a little bit. Or if you want to, take a break on it, just let me know whenever you're ready for more work on that.
No, I'm ready for more work, but...
Sorry, but you cut out when you said but. Okay, I'm going to end the recording here.